Welcome to another episode of the All Tens podcast. I'm your co-host, Josh West. With me, as always, Clay Harris. And today, Clay, we're being joined by a very special guest. She's the founder and CEO of Success Profit Planning, a financial services firm to help small business owners utilize their financial statements on a continual basis to make business decisions and validate their efforts to generate revenue, ensure profitability, and manage cash flow. Please welcome to the pod, Martha Gordash. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Martha, Josh and I have been talking for the past couple of weeks about like this topic specifically because a lot of the folks that we work with and probably a lot of our listeners are founder types, like people who've started a business and they're really great at the thing that they do. And then they show up, we ask about financial results and they're like, well, I know how much my revenue was or what, right? So I can't wait to have this conversation with you. I'm very grateful you're here. But before we dive in, tell us a little bit more about how your career landed you here running this business as the CEO.
It's kind of a long runway, but I started in marketing thinking that was much easier than the numbers end and found out I like the numbers end much better because that's where you get to drive the business. Because without cash, you can't operate. Well, how do you know if you have cash? Or how do you know that if you have cash down the road? Like, what's your projections? And that's, to me, is fascinating to see.
When did you take the entrepreneurial leap yourself then?
Well, I actually owned a business a long time ago, which I shuttered because timing was all wrong and it wasn't a financial services business, but I learned a tremendous amount. So about 6 years ago, I started this firm to basically provide fractional CFO and bookkeeping services to companies to help them move that needle and to understand what those numbers mean. It's confusing.
It's very confusing. And I imagine that Josh and I's experience working with entrepreneurs and that leadership teams where, I don't know, Josh, what would you say, like 1 out of 10 kind of have a firm grasp on the financial reports? Like, I imagine that's probably similar for you, Martha. That's why you have clients. But tell us a little bit more when you start working with a client or when you're meeting folks who need your help. What are the things for our listeners? I'm trying to get them to hear problems that they might be facing too. What are the things that you hear the businesses that you work with worry about, be frustrated about, be scared of, those sorts of things?
Well, they don't understand their numbers and they're kind of confused by it. Some of them only talk about their numbers once a year when it's time to do taxes. By that time, it's all historical. You can no longer make decisions with most of those numbers because it's already happened and you can't change your trajectory. So I think the fear kind of comes in from not truly understanding those numbers and basically feeling like they're flying blind. So they're kind of, and then on top of it, they don't always understand how the profit and loss and balance sheet and cash flow statements play together because they're kind of like, well, yeah, I know my profit and loss. And then the next question is, where are those payments I made for those items, those asset items I purchased?
Right.
Because they don't understand that you don't just need a profit and loss. You need all three of them to play together to get the full picture.
There's in what you just said, Martha, there's like this assumption that they know. And so like, I'm trying, this is like a conundrum. I was lucky enough with my business partner starting a business that they were like, I was probably like most of my clients. I wasn't that well versed, but I was working with a couple of MBA guys and they love the spreadsheets. And so for our clients, I think it's interesting for our listeners, interesting to hear, like, if you're just looking at the numbers once a year when your CPA says it's time to prep taxes, that's an interesting thing that should make you think, oh, I should probably pay more attention. Another one is, if I'm just managing the business by the balance in the checking account, like what are some other like kind of crazy things that you hear when you're talking to people when you just get to meet them, Martha?
Well, my favorite is I have money because I have money in the bank account. that really doesn't mean anything. Because what I'm finding when I walk into businesses, not only don't they perhaps understand any of those statements, and they often don't. They might understand their top line revenue and they might know that that's my net profit. They don't know how those numbers were derived. Well, the revenue, obviously, it's the amount you sold, but the rest of it. Where are they coming from? Why are they where they are? And so I think that creates this whole disconnect between how they run their business. And if they're not looking at it, they don't even know what their expenses are. When you tell a business owner, well, there's X amount on a credit card, and they're like, oh, I thought I only spent like this tiny amount. And really it's a much larger amount. It's a symptom of not looking at it. Because we often, even in our personal lives, we go out and we spend money. Do we know how much it is? Because we spend it one little piece at a time. You don't go out and, you don't have a household budget and say, well, I can spend, $500 on groceries this week and then, go spend $700 at one time. But maybe you spent $700 throughout the week if you decided that, you really wanted the best of the best all week.
Martha, as you've talked through this, I hear two things, and it really resonates with me in my work with clients. One is the understanding of the numbers. They don't. And the other is the frequency with which we're looking at those numbers. And I think for a lot of our listeners out there, they may be in the category of, well, I've hired a fractional CFO or I have a bookkeeper, but they're relying on them, and that's kind of where it stops. And so sort of a two-part question for you to address both of those things. For them to look at that statement for the first time might feel overwhelming, and there's lots of line items there. So what are the main things that they could start to just look at to begin to understand? And how often do you recommend that they review those numbers?
I would recommend at least bi-weekly. But that also means that you have your accounting or bookkeeping up to date. A lot of times when I walk in, no reconciliations have been done. Or they haven't been done in months and months. You don't have accurate numbers because programs like QuickBooks, if you haven't dealt with your bank feed, it's not reflecting in your financial statements. So when an owner asks me for instant financial statement generation, and I'm looking at their file going, well, I have no clue if any of this is even accurate. So there's an accuracy issue because they don't understand how the bank feed works. I mean, if this was all on paper, it's different, but we're not on paper anymore. So there's that. The big things I would ask people to look at is, what's your top line revenue? What is that next line, that funny one that's called cost of goods sold or cost of sales or whatever you want to call it? Take a look at that number. That's the number they need to know because that covers their overhead. And then, of course, there's the big question. Are you actually paying yourself as an owner? Because you have a net number at the bottom. Is that net number the number that you consider your salary, your portion, or is that actual profit after all employees or people working in the business have been paid, including the founder?
How many?
Martha, I've got a little anecdote
to
to share about that one. One of my clients, when they were looking for a business to purchase, when they were going through some diligence, the current owner of that business handed him ATM receipts and said, "This is what I've paid myself." And that's where it was recorded, just in a shoebox.
Wow.
Yeah.
It happens because, like you said, founders are very good at what they do. What they didn't get into business to do is their bookkeeping, finance numbers. A lot of them don't even really contemplate that before they open a business because they don't realize the significance of having that piece in place and set up properly.
I think some of the things that Josh and I have been talking about on the podcast in near recent past is about kind of the reporting. But Martha, I think you bring up this really actually spectacular point that just like everything else we do in the job, the reporting is after the fact. you have to get the discipline and the processes in place where, whether it's the bank feed getting reconciled on a monthly basis, or maybe even more often, depending on the number of transactions you're processing, or the expenses being booked correctly, or even the things like normalizing or like solidifying how you want to categorize things, whether they're cost of sales or operating expenses or those sorts of things. Like getting that tight requires like real effort even before you even can understand. You have to like, there's just so much work that I don't want to characterize it as so much work. There's just discipline and process that has to be put into place in order for you to have an understanding. It's just like any other part of the business. You can't just count. I'll be like Josh used to run like digital marketing, right? And you can't just count clicks and hope that it works because you know how to count them now. You actually have to know do all the work beforehand that generates the clicks in order for the report to even tell you anything meaningful. You got to do
You're completely correct, because I'm a numbers person across the board. And so I was looking at something and I discovered there was a marketing contract in place for one of my clients, because I do the finance end, so I don't touch every part of this, right? And so one of my next questions is going to be, so you spent this money. Where are your metrics? Where are your KPIs? Is anyone providing you with any of that? Because that affects that revenue number. Because now you have an expense in the marketing and advertising category, most likely. But what's the correlation to your revenue? Is it just an expense, or is it something that's actually driving your revenue, your profit? So that's a really good point. You can't just count clicks. Same thing for sales. You can't just count the number of sales. Are you actually making money on every sale?
Mm.
Because just selling more may not make you more profitable.
That sounds like, Martha, the delineation between like just having someone who does the books and someone who's like kind of giving you advice, right? And I imagine that's why you do a little bit of both. Is that accurate?
It is, because I can't help myself. When I see a set of books, I see those things, and I love to see small business owners succeeding. And if I don't, help them with that success, then I kind of feel like I've missed a huge part of it. Because a lot of times they're not talking to a lot of other people.
Mm.
And so once they understand that statement, or they understand their numbers, and you're absolutely right, it needs to be done more than once a month for a growing business. For a business that's totally stable and they're just want to be where they're at, it becomes a less dynamic thing happening throughout the month. But for those that are looking at growth, or they're really tight on cash flow, weekly or biweekly check-ins are incredibly important.
Martha, for our listeners that may be a little bit more advanced, where they do have someone sitting in that finance seat who's strong, and they've gone through the work themselves to understand the numbers and start to review it regularly, get the insights, and really start to make some decisions that help them run the business in that way. But for what I'll say, my more advanced clients, what they then find is a frustration of migrating those disciplines and just the financial acumen further into the organization. First, starting with other members of the leadership team, and then what we might refer to as those mid-managers, kind of getting them stronger with financials. What would you recommend for those listeners to help them kind of, help some other people get coached up on finances?
I think it's incredibly important, if they have those mid-managers, that you start doing a budgeting process that involves everybody, so that they understand the numbers for their department. Because let's say you have a marketing department. If they don't understand the overall numbers of the company and how they fit into it, it creates a disconnect. Same thing with production. If they know their numbers and they know the metrics that the company is looking to meet, and you make it a whole company experience instead of little silos, your company culture improves, your profitability improves, and people's job satisfaction, because now they feel like they're part of it instead of just, oh, we'll pull you in and say, oh, you didn't meet your numbers. Well, what were your numbers and what's the action plan to meet them?
Fantastic advice.
I think, Josh, sometimes our people, or business owners think that like, well, if I just tell them, then they'll start to get it, right? Or like, if I just like share the results. I think, Martha, your advice around like involve them in the input. Don't just send them the spreadsheet, right? Is like, you kind of got to, just like everything else, just like you kind of got to bring them along. You can't just hope to meet them at the end, right? And so like I love it.
Yeah, I'm going to lack commitment and taking ownership if I'm not involved in the process.
Right, 100%. So I'm gonna bring us to a close here, Martha. I'm gonna ask you. I'm gonna give you a heads up. I'm gonna ask you for like a nugget or two to give our listeners to do tomorrow. But first, I'm gonna ask Josh to synthesize the episode. Any nuggets from the episode, Josh, you want to share with our listeners before we wrap up?
Absolutely. I've compartmentalized it into three kind of different phases. One, if you have no idea what's happening, you've got receipts in a shoebox, call Martha. Okay? Get yourself straightened out, get some professional help. Once you get that professional help and you actually have accurate financial statements in front of you, then now we're at phase 2 of, go through the efforts to educate yourself and truly understand what each of those statements is telling you and the insights that you can draw from them to run a better business. And then finally, once you've done that for yourself and you want to migrate that throughout the organization, as Martha says, I think it's important to engage them and bring them along in that education process and start to try to get them to run their department like a business within the business. And if you can understand those disciplines there, then you can see how they apply to the organization as a whole. So that's how I took Martha's talk. And I think our listeners may find themselves in one of those phases.
Cool. Love it. Martha, for our listeners, if they could go do one or two things tomorrow, next week, give people some actionable advice. What's actionable advice? What's something you'd recommend?
Make sure that your bookkeeping is caught up so that your numbers are valid. And then if you don't understand them, go find someone to help you understand them. Because if you don't know someone, there's lots of people out there that do what I do. There's always calling me, but a lot of us already have people in our network we can reach out to that would love to help.
Love it. And just in case they do want to call you, Martha, what's the best way to find you on the internet? How can people find you?
SuccessProfitPlanning.com. Or they can even call me, 360-477-6873.
Love it.
I
cool.
know,
Martha.
Good old-fashioned telephone.
Hey, I'm one day she was 12 at the time, my 12-year-old was like, Dad, I need you to, I don't remember. She had to make a phone call for something. And I was like, oh, well, here, I'll call them. I picked up my phone and dialed the number and handed her the phone. And I could hear the person answer. And my 12-year-old, who might have never been on the phone before, literally just held her phone up to the ear and didn't know what to do. Like, what a world, right? I was like, you have to talk. Anyway, you can pick up the phone. Call Martha. I love it. All right. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, so thank you so much for joining us, Martha. I think this is really helpful for our listeners to get their hands around the financial well-being of their business. I hope that if they don't feel confident there, they'll give you a call. But thanks for listening, everybody. My name is Clay. His name is Josh. We're EOS implementers helping entrepreneurs build great businesses and even better lives. And we're so happy that you're a listener. Please like, rate, subscribe, comment, share, etc. The list goes on. Some verb. Do it. And we'll catch you on our next episode. Thanks again, Martha. Good job, Josh. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Martha. Bye, Clay.
Bye.